If there's one series I'd say is overlooked nowadays, one collection that I grew up with for its better entries and its worst ones, if there is one group of films that is so emotionally deep as well as visually stunning, it's the Mighty Ducks series.
Mighty Ducks! Yeah!
Stop it, Gordon.
Oh, wait, no, it's the Planet of the Apes trilogy. That's right, we're back to talk about the final act of the Talking Monkey movie. No, not Oz the Great and Powerful. Today we're talking about the conclusion to the soft reboot of the franchise, a beautiful, melancholy ending to a beloved character and the end of a beginning of a new age. That's right, we're talking about War for the Planet of the Apes. This series is genuinely beautiful, a trilogy focusing as a character study not only on the main character, but as a character study on humanity as a whole. This is what the original film does so well, holding up a mirror to the worst aspects of our society. However, this trilogy does not only this, but recontextualizes the worst and best of humanity by showing it at a very extreme point, the end of itself. So I'm finishing my quest not only to show you why this trilogy is so important to me, but well, why it's just really, really good. Go watch the first two videos on Rise and Dawn first, as I'll be referring to things we talked about in those, from the plot to the characters to the themes and all that stuff. So, no more stalling, let's jump into it. A pretty standard production took place, and while it's not really super interesting or noteworthy, I thought I'd include it here for the structure of the videos to remain the same because, you know, I think it's mildly interesting. So, background info, go. Development started after the studio saw one of the final cuts of Dawn in January of 2014, and with an original release date of 2016, this meant that the director and the writer got to work closely when crafting the script. Principal photography started around October-ish of 2015 and finished by March of 2016. The filming took place in Vancouver, Virginia, the Sierra Nevada mountains, the Kananaskis, okay, and Spirit Lake, and sets in Burnaby Studios as well as ones outside at these various locations. And with a budget of $150 to $152 million, the film grossed a total of $490.7 million, with critical and audience reception being that of near universal praise. It won a bunch of visual effects awards and was nominated for even more, as well as Best Director, Best Writer, Best Performance, all that jazz. It won a few of those, but you know, it mostly lost out to the likes of... And again, the shoot was pretty standard, but the result was clearly brilliant. So, let's take a look at the plot for those who haven't seen the movie in a while. 15 years after the ALZ-113 virus, also known as the simian flu, spread across the globe, Caesar has tried to maintain peace between the apes and the humans. However, since Koba's debacle, what's left of the American military is out to end the burgeoning ape society. Now, Caesar and his clan are hiding out in the Muir Woods while a ruthless special forces colonel of the military faction Alpha Omega hunts them down. It is all-out war. A team of soldiers moves through the woods, being helped by an ape named Red, an ape loyal to Koba, whom the soldiers refer to as Donkey. The soldiers launch their attack on the base, with the apes retaliating with great force. Red, along with several surviving soldiers and one specific one named Preacher, are captured. Caesar, walking up like the goat he is, sends them back to their camp unharmed to send the message that the apes are peaceful. Red, meanwhile, escapes from the hold of Winter and runs back to the camp. Later, Caesar's son Blue Eyes returns home to his family and his mate Lake with good news as Caesar rejoins his wife Cornelia and the youngest son Cornelius. They discuss a plan to move the clan away from the woods and towards a new home. They agree to set out in the morning. That night, several Alpha Omega soldiers led by Colonel McCulloch stalk the base. What comes is a tensely quiet scene of Caesar getting the apes ready to battle as the soldiers start sneaking inside. The soldiers are killed by the apes, but McCulloch shoots and kills Cornelia and Blue Eyes, thinking one of them must be Caesar. Caesar finds his family dead and leaps after McCulloch as he gets away through the waterfall. McCulloch severs the rope and then lets Caesar fall. In the waterfall, Caesar fall in the waterfall. I don't know, maybe there's something there. Caesar returns to his base and thankfully finds Cornelius safe. He places his son in Lake's care as he heads off to kill McCulloch alone while the rest of the apes head toward the desert in search of their new home. Caesar is followed by Maurice, Rocket, and Luca.
The gang's all here.
Caesar initially refuses their company, but they insist, so the apes set out to kill the commander. The apes march on, accompanied by some beautiful cinematography, and they encounter a lone man who attempts to shoot them, but Caesar kills him first with almost no remorse on his face. They enter the man's home and find a little girl lying in bed, clearly afraid. Maurice gently hands her a doll in a rather sweet scene, but as she tries to speak, it becomes clear that she is physically unable. As the apes begin to leave, they see the girl next to the dead man who was probably her father. Caesar insists they cannot take her, but Maurice insists he cannot leave her there. So now she's coming along for the journey. The group comes across a military camp. They find Winter, who has defected to the human side after Red promised he would be spared if Winter let him go, leading Red to tell McCulloch where to find the apes. Caesar interrogates Winter and learns that McCulloch and his army are talking about heading toward the border. As a couple of guards approach, Caesar puts his hand over Winter's mouth, eventually putting him in a chokehold, but he ends up killing him. That night, Caesar has a nightmare about Koba, who appears bloody and even more scarred than before. He repeats to Caesar his final words.
Ape. Not kill. Ape.
As the group pass through the snowy mountains, they find the bodies of 3 soldiers shot in the snow. One of them is still alive, but just barely. Caesar asks him why he is shot, but the soldier cannot speak, just like the girl. Maurice points out that the man will die from his wounds, so Caesar puts him out of his misery. As the apes are looking around the area, a small creature in a jacket steals a rifle and one of the horses. The apes chase after the person until they corner it in the Shining Hotel. Oh, I mean an abandoned building, never mind. The person is revealed to be a small ape known as Bad Ape. He offers his jacket to the girl, seeing that she is cold. Bad Ape is capable of speech like Caesar, shocking the group as they had no idea there were other evolved apes outside of their clan. Bad Ape tells Caesar he lived in a zoo before the simian flu struck. When Bad Ape gives the group food, they notice it's labeled California Border. Caesar asks where the food came from, and Bad Ape says it came from a human zoo. At first, Bad Ape refuses to show them where the human zoo is, but as he and Caesar relate over their killed families, he eventually agrees to take them. Also, this is where the little girl gets her name, Nova, a reference to the character from the original novel by Pierre, French name, as well as the character by the same name in the first 2 Planet of the Apes movies. Once the apes reach the military camp, they are suddenly attacked by a soldier. Luca kills the soldier but is mortally wounded. He tells Caesar he's happy that at least he was able to protect him this time. Even Nova cries for Luca as he had shown her kindness before. Caesar tells the others this is why he didn't want them to come along. And to top off the moment, Maurice tells Caesar that his hatred for the colonel is making him like Koba. Caesar heads toward the camp at night by himself, only to find 2 captured apes being crucified. One, barely alive, tells Caesar that the ape clan has been captured and are being forced to work in the camp. Red then appears behind Caesar and knocks him out. Caesar wakes up to find himself face to face with the colonel. Caesar tells him that he came to kill the colonel after the colonel killed Caesar's family. And McCulloch gives an insincere apology and says he meant to kill Caesar. Whoops. So Caesar is put to work with the rest of the captured apes. He sees Lake and Cornelius in a separate cage, and it's clear that the camp conditions are inhuman. That was supposed to be a joke as inhumane, but instead I said inhuman, and I'm not really sure if that worked upon reading that out loud, but you know what, I'll keep it whatever. The apes were forced to build a wall, all while being starved and dehydrated. One ape, too weak to continue, messes up the wall and is whipped by Red. Caesar, almost echoing the first time he spoke on screen, commands him to stop.
Leave him!
The scene is tense as the apes stop working, rallying behind their leader once again. Caesar is whipped in the apes' place as McCulloch demands that Caesar tell the apes to continue working. Caesar counters, saying they need food and water to continue. So McCulloch kills one ape, aiming at Caesar next, but Lake and the other apes start back at work. Red and Preacher escort Caesar to McCulloch's office in chains. Caesar once again tells the colonel to give the apes food and water. With a dismissal of the notion, Caesar tells McCulloch that he has no mercy. The colonel claps back at Caesar, pointing out that he showed up just to kill him. Caesar responds saying he did show mercy by sparing his soldiers earlier in the movie, and McCulloch then tells Caesar about his son, who was a soldier in the army until he was affected by a new strain of the simian flu and began to lose his voice along with other soldiers. McCulloch killed his son as he knew that they were regressing into a primitive state. He then explains that the wall is meant for another military force that is coming for him to put an end to his radicalized faction. He then separates Caesar from the others, but he does give the other apes food and water to continue working. That night, Caesar has another hallucination of Koba, who tells Caesar to join him, most likely in death. Meanwhile, in the distance, Maurice, Rocket, Bad Ape, and Nova are seeing what's going on in the camp. Nova, spurred on by her empathy, walks into the camp and gives Caesar food and water, as well as the doll that Maurice gave her. Soldiers approach, and fearing that they will kill Nova, Rocket steps in as a distraction to allow her to get away. The soldiers capture Rocket, and McCulloch picks up Nova's doll, which is stained with blood. Maurice and Bad Ape find a way to sneak into the camp via an underground tunnel. As they dig through, they find a water source and have to stop so as to not flood the tunnel. They can't get to the cage for the children, only the adults, so Caesar and Rocket work together to find a way to make it to the other cage and save the ape children. And that plan is a shit plan. Literally. Rocket creates a diversion by flinging excrement at one of the guards. That guard enters the cage, and Bad Ape pulls him underground. The child apes climb over the cages into the adult cage, down through the tunnels and away from the camp. With all the apes escaped, they plan to head out, but Caesar admits to Rocket that he is like Koba because he cannot let go of his hatred for the Colonel. So once again, Caesar heads to the Colonel to finish his mission. But just as daylight breaks, the rival military force begins their attack on the camp, launching rockets at the soldiers while they fire back. Caesar makes it to McCulloch's office and finds him drunk. He tries to speak, but he has lost his voice too. Nova's doll has been contaminated with the new strain of the simian flu. Caesar grabs a gun, and the Colonel takes Caesar's hand to hold it to his head, ready for Caesar to pull the trigger. A tense, long, and personal beat occurs, but Caesar can't bring himself to kill him. Not like this. So McCulloch grabs the gun and shoots himself in the head. In the midst of the chaos, Caesar tries to rejoin his apes, but he is unable to move forward. He finds an opportunity and grabs a grenade belt. He pulls the pin, aims at the leaking fuel tank, and then he is shot with an arrow by Preacher. Red sees this and, having been changed by witnessing Caesar's heroicism, turns on the humans and fires a grenade at Preacher before he finishes off Caesar. Red is immediately executed, but has given Caesar enough time to finish the job, destroying the tank and blowing up the whole facility as he just barely gets away through the tunnel. Caesar reaches outside the base as the other military cheers the fall of Alpha Omega's camp. Some soldiers spot Caesar and are about to shoot him when an avalanche begins to rumble down the mountain. Caesar and the others frantically climb up the trees to safety while the avalanche wipes out all the remaining soldiers. The apes take a moment to take in what has happened. As far as they know, all of the military left is now destroyed. The apes and Nova start anew on their journey to their new home until they finally reach the land that Blue Eyes had found for them not so long ago. The apes rejoice as they explore their new home. Caesar and Maurice watch the apes celebrating, but Maurice notices Caesar's arrow wound. Knowing that he is going to die, Caesar asks Maurice to make sure Cornelius is protected. Maurice assures him that he will, promising that his son will know who he was and what he did for his family. With that, Caesar watches on the land, finally bringing peace to his kind, and Caesar dies. The end. Oh man, I get emotional just thinking about it, but you know the drill by now. Let's talk about some of these fascinating characters. So, the first character on our list is Red. He was formerly one to break away from Caesar's rule with another ape named Gray, and after a humiliation, he was found by the Colonel. Upon speaking and airing out that his allegiances were not to Caesar, the Colonel decided to spare Red and use him to help out his soldiers in hunting down Caesar and his apes. Not much is known about his or the other apes' motivation for leaving Caesar's group other than that they were followers of Koba. Did they have a personal reason for hating humans like Koba did, or was it just ideologically they did not see a world where humans and apes could live at the same time? It's unclear, but what is clear is that Red functions as a stand-in for the other apes who dissent from Caesar, so his arc in the film becomes interesting with compared to Caesar's mythological status, which we'll get to in a second, don't worry. There's something to be said about leaders who actually believe in something, who don't let the world around them change their core principles and values, even when it would benefit those they care about. There's something so compelling as a human being to read about, or if you're lucky, witness firsthand in a leader such as that. From George Washington to Abraham Lincoln to Martin Luther King Jr. to many, many more even outside of the US. I know, right? Shocking. The point being, when you have something meaningful to say, and you stand by those convictions, it's not that everybody immediately agrees with you, it's that you maintain the loyalty of those who follow you, and you make it possible for others to eventually join you. We see this in the character of Red. He initially joins Koba, and after Koba's death, he flees. He holds on to the conviction that Koba had in that all humans should be either killed or conquered, but eventually, his hatred for humans expands to hatred of those who follow Caesar. And in the Alpha Omega Squadron, he finds the enemy of his enemy. But this is clearly an untenable position. He hates the humans, but will work with them to destroy the apes he disagrees with. That's why, including all the abuse he saw at the hands of the humans in this film, the real reason he turns to save Caesar is because he sees Caesar's uncompromising spirit through the hell that is the Alpha Omega base. That's why this character is so interesting. He changes his mind because of someone else who does not compromise on their values with their actions. It's not just words, it is those actions. It's a beautiful reminder that standing for your values does not mean a pleasant experience awaits you, but in the end, it will save you. That is, if your values are worth anything at all. Speaking of which, here we have our main antagonist, Colonel J. Wesley McCulloch, a U.S. Army Special Forces officer and the commanding officer of the Alpha Omega Squadron. Not much is known about his background, but it's clear that he's been in the military for a while before the outbreak of the simian flu. Now, this is a true battle of the titans between him and Caesar. Both have this cult following I spoke about just before. Both are clearly intelligent and can speak their needs and the needs of their people. Both are down to the last few of their kind, so far as they know, and even though one is a man and one is an ape, they are clearly meant to be very similar. The real difference, though, is, of course, in the violence one perpetrates to keep his species alive. And that's the difference that makes the difference. See, one thing this whole franchise does so well is explore what it means to be human against the backdrop of an inhuman species that so closely resembles our own. The first two films are pessimistic in their outlook on the trajectory of humanity. Dooming itself was simply inevitable. And the later three films, while a bit darker in tone than the first two, eventually end with the idea that though humanity will always have portions of itself that seek violence and destruction, the only way to move away from catastrophe is through compassion and forgiveness, through allowing equality. In Rise, we see the types of people who cause the beginnings of the downfall of humanity, the greedy and the sadistic. In Dawn, we see the types of people who both deserve to live and commit to death. We see the humble and the kind pitted against the vengeful and the broken. And here in War, we find what remains of humanity represented in Nova and the Colonel. I was going to talk more exclusively about Nova, but I'd rather talk about the themes a bit more instead, so we'll skip her and not make the video extremely long. The point being, Nova represents the side of humanity that shows compassion and forgiveness, a trait the original Caesar valued and used to establish the more optimistic timeline seen in Battle for the Planet of the Apes. But the Colonel represents the last negative trait of humanity, the final challenge to overcome that will bring about a better world. The Colonel represents the opposite of empathy, though not quite a sadism. He is the embodiment of vanity. The vanity that makes others worship themselves as God, that calls those who are different deplorable to one's own sense of self, that seeks the destruction of what is apart from them, because what is apart could never be as immaculate as what is them. And to be clear, there is a difference between vanity and pride, one that is described in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, as it were. Vanity and pride are different things, though the words are often used synonymously. A person may be proud without being vain. Pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves, vanity to what we would have others think of us. Vanity is about control of the narrative that others have about yourself, or control of your little part of the world, for instance. In an ever-changing cosmos with the only certainties in life being that of death and taxes, one who is unable to come to terms with these existential thoughts will be brought to one of these two paths: deep depression or extreme vanity. For the Colonel to believe he, and by extension, the humans are better than the apes necessitates that the apes be put on an unequal ground. And the solution for a megalomaniac to an apparently obvious inequality is not to raise the tide so that all ships float higher. No. It is to destroy what is sinking. And this is the last warning of the series. The vain will seek your destruction rather than contend with the miserable fact that they are not special. And believe me, this profound thought the film showcases really well. The conclusion of his arc is to become just like the animal he believed the apes to be, and he practically begs for death, because why would someone so vain want to live with the knowledge they were wrong about their superiority? It's really impactful and just extremely fascinating that the film uses this character to show the one last vestige of the age of humanity and the last warning towards the apes. But as it is in life, it's not just enough to warn others against something. You have to offer them something to mimic. And this is where Caesar comes in. We've talked a lot about Caesar over the course of these videos, and I've tried to relay these films to some central biblical story because I do believe the parallels, if unintended, are clearly there. But here, there is no coincidence, and this film is the reason why it changed my outlook on the previous two. Caesar is clearly positioned as a Moses figure in this story. He leads his people out of slavery to a group that worships a false god, to a promised land that he is unable to enter due to his previous actions causing him to die. They might have well titled this Exodus of the Planet of the Apes. That would have been kind of a cool title, actually. But, you know, with the original films making the apparent claim that religion was something to keep the dumb from messing things up and to keep the smart from overthrowing its own systems, I don't know. The series wouldn't have felt too coherent with that title, but I digress. But that brings up the obvious point of, well, why did they choose to go for any religious interpretation? The in-universe answer is because Caesar eventually becomes this myth that the apes will later turn into the leader of their religion. The meta answer is that the stories these movies follow are archetypal, and good religious stories are also archetypal, which is why they can be applied to most people's lives. But getting back to this movie, if the kernel is the representation of vanity, then what would that make Caesar? Well, when Googling the antonym to vanity, one of the answers that comes up is humility. And I love this because Numbers 12:3 says Moses was the most humble man on earth, which is funny with the context that the Torah is attributed to Moses, but also in the context of the chapter where God essentially says the difference between Moses and literally anyone else ever is that God speaks directly to him as God is speaking directly to Aaron. But the reason that humility is looked at in a positive light in the religious sense is because it combats the vanity one may experience. It's a submission to something greater than yourself that makes you humble, and it's this humility that Moses possesses that makes him so close to God. At least that's the idea anyways. But all that aside, this humility is something shown in the character of Caesar. For Caesar, he has always acted in the interest of those he cares about, and even though he has a wife and children and sits apart from everyone else and they all practically worship him, he never uses this as a way of putting others down. It's more likely that the other apes demand that he is happy and that he is set apart from them because of how great a figure he had become by the end of Rise, let alone the end of this trilogy. And in this film, a film about him losing his path, what does it show him doing? Acting selfishly and angrily. It isn't until he reaches the Alpha Omega camp and stands up for the apes at the risk of his own safety that his leadership shines again. And what happens here? He is mimicked. Blake acts selflessly, going back to the back-breaking work without adequate food or water in order to spare Caesar, and the other apes follow. It's this continuous, selfless attitude on the individual level that brings about the safety and the eventual thriving of the collective. This can be seen in the trilogy, assuredly, and even by the end of the third, fourth, and fifth film from the original series. See, the first two films, like I said before, are more warning against our worst aspects, the parts of our nature that refuse to be wrong and don't care about or even try to ponder on the consequences. I think the Cold War being as prevalent as it was in the 1960s definitely contributed to this feeling that the world was on the brink of total destruction and any one wrong move would be the end. But perhaps as a consequence of the moon landing putting the US on top of the Cold War for a moment or two, or perhaps as a rejection and ideology that fighting against something is as powerful as fighting for something, as the series progressed, it simply became more optimistic. This optimism causes the series to lose most of its edge, and paired with the lower budgets, the series really did kind of die out. But I don't think this is necessarily a lesson in failure as much as it is in a novel idea that increasingly became stale over time. To me, this series has always spoken to truths that I find compelling even to this day. The social commentary of the inhumanity of racism from the original, the fears that our nature is to destroy ourselves in the sequel, the question of what we are doing in relation to the divine from the third film, the rage towards injustice in the fourth, and the only way to combat evil is in love, compassion, and equality in the fifth, to the spirit of righteous rebellion of the reboot, to the warning of the spirit of Cain in its sequel, and finally to the hope of a better future and one brought about through humility and selflessness in this film. This is the greatest lesson the film has to teach us. Yes, it may be a bit obvious if you've watched any other movie that has any moral story to it, but that doesn't make it untrue. As I said in the Rise video, selfishness is the root of all evil, and that takes its form in greed and sadism. But to counter that, what can give one direction not just away from something bad, but towards something good, is selflessness. That takes the form of humility to something greater than oneself. Because if everyone were to act as though there was something greater than them, something far beyond their control or any system they could hope to set up, yet had a strong moral quality to it, then perhaps the world would simply be a better place. But hey, don't take it from me. Take it from this movie that came from Hollywood. Well, everybody, another year and another series of video essays that I did on a series of movies. I don't know if there are any other trilogies or movie series that haven't been covered like a million times on YouTube already, but if not, yeah, I guess I can't make any more videos next year. Oh well. But hey, thanks for watching for real. And if you haven't seen the other two videos that I made on this series, go check those out. I did the Indiana Jones series last year, and let me just say, they get better. If you're starting with the first one, they get better. You know, you can see in those videos I'm still learning how to do the video essay format, and you know, I have a budget of nothing outside of what I bought for school, but that was a long time ago. But yeah, hey, if you like this video, maybe you'll like some of our other stuff, and you'll hit the subscribe button, or ring-a-ding-ding that bell, the like button if you like the video, comment, whatever. I don't care, but it would be cool if you did. I've got like another video essay that I've been toying around with the idea of in the old noggin, and I'd like to get that out in the next few months, but we'll see. But hey, otherwise, I've been Kyle, and I still am, and this has been a retrospective on War for the Planet of the Apes.